My father assigned me a task he believed I would fail, handling a $1 million business deal, convinced it would expose my incompetence. My mother even laughed and confidently told everyone I wouldn't survive 5 minutes in that meeting. Yet the next morning, when my father stepped into his office and saw the breaking headlines, he stopped cold. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 27 years old. And if you think you already know how this story ends, you might want to keep listening. What do you do when the very people who raised you mistake intelligence for defiance? When their attempt to teach you a lesson becomes the force that ultimately frees you? That morning, my father slid a folder across the breakfast table. His voice was sharp, almost daring. If you want to prove yourself, then do it. Represent us in the Portland merger. Let's see what happens when real stakes are involved. My mother sipped her tea and scoffed. She won't even make it halfway through the meeting without falling apart. I didn't argue. I just smiled, quiet on the outside, burning inside. Challenge accepted. By midnight, I had studied the 200-page contract twice, marked every overlooked clause my father's legal team had missed, and memorized the rival company's entire board structure. My coffee table disappeared under stacks of notes, tabs, and annotations. Even my cat, Leo, had fallen asleep on the non-disclosure agreement like it was a blanket. At exactly 9 a.m., I entered the marble conference room wearing a navy suit my father once dismissed as too bold. A dozen executives in gray turned toward me instantly. The youngest person in the room, and the only woman. The chairman leaned forward. "Where is Mr. Lane?" "He sent me." I replied evenly, sliding the contract onto the table. He believed I should understand what real competence looks like. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, I had negotiated a 12% increase in partnership value and secured exclusive rights to our intellectual property, something my father's team had never even considered. When I stood to leave, the opposing CEO shook my hand. "You just saved your father $2 million, he admitted. That night, I prepared the official press release. By sunrise, every major business outlet carried the same headline: Harper Lane finalizes landmark merger. Youngest negotiator in company history. Somewhere in my parents' kitchen, the laughter had disappeared. I arrived at Lane Industries at 8:05 a.m. sharp. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, silence spread through the hallway like a shockwave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes dropped to desks. Even breathing seemed cautious. On my father's glass office wall, a copy of Forbes Business Daily had been pinned up. The headline was impossible to ignore: Harper Lane secures historic merger. Lane Industries enters new era. My father stood behind his desk, phone in one hand, newspaper in the other. When he saw me, his expression tightened. "You went to the press," he said coldly. "I followed standard procedure," I answered calmly. "The PR team issued the statement. I copied you on the email." My mother's voice came through the speakerphone. "Harper, do you understand what you've done? Everyone is asking why you led the negotiation instead of your father." "Because I did lead it," I said firmly. "And it was successful." My father exhaled sharply and lowered himself into his chair. "You could have ruined everything. That deal was supposed to humble you, not turn you into a headline." That was the moment something inside me stopped bending. "You didn't send me there to learn," I said quietly. "You sent me there to fail." I just refused to play along. For a long moment, only the air conditioning filled the silence. Then, unexpectedly, my father laughed low, almost reluctant. "You're exactly like your mother." "No," I corrected him, stepping closer. "I'm like the version of her before she started treating your opinion like law." He looked up, surprised. I leaned slightly over his desk, holding his gaze. "From now on, when you introduce me, don't call me your daughter, who's still learning. Call me your partner, who just saved your company." Then I turned and walked out. My heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. At the reception desk, I heard a junior analyst whisper, "That was unbelievable." I didn't slow down. I only smiled once. For the first time, my worth wasn't debated. It was documented. By noon, Lane Industries was in chaos. News channels calling nonstop, investors demanding updates, and my father demanding silence. Unfortunately for him, silence had already lost control of the narrative. When I entered the emergency boardroom, the directors were already seated. Many had known me since I was a teenager, watching me do homework in the corner while they discussed acquisitions. Their expressions were careful, measured. My father stood at the head of the table. "Let's be clear," he said. "Yesterday does not change the structure of this company. Harper's result was impressive, but she is still inexperienced." A woman at the table, Mrs. Owens, raised an eyebrow. "With respect, Richard," she said evenly, "she negotiated better terms than your executive team has achieved in 5 years. Maybe the structure is what needs reconsidering." Murmurs spread across the room. My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't about ego," he said firmly. "It's about experience." I spoke before he could continue. Experience isn't measured by age. It's measured by outcomes. And if outcomes are what truly matter, then let's examine the numbers. I brought up the presentation I had spent the night preparing. Charts, projections, and the financial results of the merger filled the screen. Projected growth had increased by 24%. Liability had dropped by 17%. Media coverage had doubled our market exposure in just 12 hours. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't resistance. It was understanding. Mrs. Owens gave a faint smile. "I'd say the results speak for themselves." When the meeting ended, my father walked past me without saying a word. But later that afternoon, I overheard him in his office, speaking to a client. "My daughter handled the merger," he said. There was no pride in his tone yet. Not exactly. But there was no dismissal either. That night, as I locked my office, a message arrived from an unknown number. "You made them listen. Don't stop now." No signature, just a truth I already understood. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a student. I had become the standard. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts kept replaying the boardroom. Every word, every shocked expression, every half-muted compliment. I sat on my apartment balcony overlooking downtown Portland, the city lights shimmering like distant applause. For years, I had been told I was too ambitious, too emotional, too young. And yet here I was, the reason our company was trending for the first time in a decade. At 2 a.m., my phone lit up. Lane Industries stock had risen by 9.4% overnight. I stared at the screen in disbelief, then in quiet vindication. Another notification followed, a press request. CNBC Morning Brief wanted a statement from Harper Lane. By sunrise, my inbox was overflowing. Interview requests, speaking invitations, sponsorship proposals. I made coffee, put on my blazer, and watched the first light spread across my desk. Then another message arrived from my father's personal account. "Be in the office by 9. We need to discuss your future here." No congratulations. No acknowledgement. Just business. When I arrived, my mother was already seated in the corner, phone in hand, pretending not to be unsettled. My father gestured for me to sit. "You made an impression," he said. "I'll give you that. But don't let it go to your head. You work for me." I leaned back calmly. "Actually, Dad, I work with you. Unless you're suggesting partnership doesn't apply to family." His brow tightened. "What exactly are you asking for? Recognition?" "In writing," I replied. My mother sighed like I was a child asking for something unreasonable. "Oh, Harper, you don't negotiate with your parents." I gave a small smile. "Then maybe you shouldn't have raised a negotiator." Silence fell so heavily, it felt physical. For the first time, my father had no response, and that silence itself felt like victory. The boardroom carried the scent of espresso and tension. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by legal counsel and senior partners. I entered without hesitation, carrying only a folder and steady confidence that seemed to unsettle him more than any argument. "Sit," he ordered sharply. "I'll stand," I replied. He exchanged a brief look with my mother before leaning forward. "Let's be realistic, Harper. You're talented, yes, but leadership takes time. And this publicity you created." "It wasn't publicity," I interrupted. "It was strategy." The merger increased valuation and restored investor confidence. That isn't chaos. That's execution. Mrs. Owens, the only board member I trusted, folded her hands. Richard, she's right. The company needed momentum. She delivered it. My father's jaw tightened. We can't just hand her control. Then don't call it control, I said, sliding a document across the table. Call it accountability. It was a proposal, a new division, Lane Digital Initiatives. I'll run it independently, funded through the merger's profits. It preserves your legacy while allowing me to build mine. My mother frowned. Why can't you just be grateful for what your father has given you? I met her gaze. Because gratitude shouldn't require silence. The room fell completely still. Even the air seemed to pause. After a long silence, my father finally spoke. You'll be responsible for every dollar. Good, I replied. I already am. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Owens gave a faint, approving smile. Congratulations, Director Lane. Outside the boardroom, I paused for a moment, exhaling slowly. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be seen. I was leading, and the world had already noticed. By noon, the announcement went live across the internal network. Lane Industries launches new digital division led by Harper Lane. Within minutes, congratulatory messages started flooding my inbox, some genuine, some strategic. I sat in my new glass-walled office, the one that used to store archived files, now transformed with clean lines and bright light. A temporary space, but mine. My nameplate still smelled of fresh polish. Mom texted, Your father's trying to act proud, but you know how he is. He says this pressure will eat you alive. I smiled, replying simply, Good. Pressure makes diamonds. The next few days were a blur of work, assembling a team, designing frameworks, pitching innovation projects the old board had never dared to attempt. The division hummed with the sound of new ideas, keyboards, and the faint rhythm of change. Then came Friday's investor dinner. I walked in wearing a black tailored suit. Dad introduced me stiffly to the partners. This is my daughter, Harper Lane. She's handling our digital ventures. For a moment, I saw pride flash in his eyes before it quickly hid behind control. During dessert, one investor leaned toward him. Richard, if this is the future of Lane Industries, you're in good hands. Dad's smile faltered. I caught it. I always did. Back home that night, I opened an old notebook filled with his notes on how to command respect. On the last page, I added my own line. Command isn't taken, it's earned. And sometimes inherited power has to be reclaimed. When I closed the notebook, Leo brushed against my leg, purring softly. Outside, the skyline glittered like opportunity. I wasn't just part of the company anymore. I was the reason it was alive. A week later, Lane Industries was trending again, not for scandal or failure this time, but for innovation. Our pilot project had secured a $4.5 million partnership with a Silicon Valley tech firm, all negotiated under the Lane Digital Initiatives banner. The press called it the next chapter of Lane leadership. Dad didn't call it anything. He just stopped showing up to my department meetings. Mom, meanwhile, started calling more than ever, soft voice, emotional guilt. Honey, your father's under stress. You could ease things if you showed a little humility. I sipped my coffee and answered evenly. Mom, I don't owe humility for doing my job well.
She sighed.
You've changed. Yes, I said. And that's the point. That Friday, the partners hosted a celebration dinner. Champagne flowed. Laughter filled the penthouse restaurant, and I felt something I'd never known inside this family name, belonging earned by merit. Mrs. Owens raised her glass to Harper. The reason this company's heartbeat sounds new again. Applause followed. I caught Dad's expression from across the table. Conflicted pride, the kind that hurts more than envy because it admits defeat. After dessert, he approached quietly. You made quite a show tonight, he said. Just results, I replied. The same thing you've always demanded. He studied me for a long moment. You really think you can run this company one day? I smiled faintly. I already am. You just haven't accepted it yet. When I left the restaurant, the city air felt electric, like standing on the edge of everything I'd fought for. My reflection in the glass door showed someone I didn't recognize at first, confident, calm, capable. The kind of leader he'd spent a lifetime doubting could exist, especially in his daughter. The Monday after the celebration felt like the quiet before a new season. The newspaper on Dad's desk read, Lane Industries appoints Harper Lane as co-CEO to drive modernization strategy. He hadn't even told me. The board had voted over the weekend, led by Mrs. Owens and the investors I'd won through the merger. When I walked into his office, he was staring at the headline, his hands motionless on either side of the page. "You knew this was coming," I said softly. He looked up, eyes tired. "I thought I could control how it happened." I set down 2 cups of coffee. "You taught me to negotiate, to calculate, to win. You just didn't expect me to apply those lessons here." He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Maybe I underestimated you. Or maybe," I said, "you never really looked." The air between us settled, not hostile, just honest. For the first time in years, there was no hierarchy in the room, only recognition. By noon, the announcement went live. Reporters gathered in the lobby, flashes bouncing off glass walls. I stepped up to the podium beside Dad. The cameras clicked, a rhythm like thunder. "Lane Industries," I began, "isn't changing direction. It's expanding its vision. The next generation of leadership isn't about replacing tradition. It's about redefining it." The applause was immediate. Dad extended his hand for a shake. Instead, I hugged him, brief, professional, human. The room erupted again. That night, I returned to my apartment, kicked off my heels, and sank into the couch. Leo leapt into my lap, purring like approval. Mom texted one final message. "We're proud of you, Harper, even if it took us too long to say it." I smiled, setting the phone aside. Through the window, Portland glowed, steel and light reflecting a story rewritten. I'd started as a lesson they thought would fail. I ended as the headline they'd never forget.